Welcome to Blue Sky. My name is Richard Tannery, and I started this program to celebrate innovators, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. A lot of my guests on this program coming from the military into an entrepreneurial role evolves. How does that manifest? Particularly when you look at the structure that a lot of our service members are faced with during our service. There's a playbook for everything. Everything's got an SOP. Other people are constantly driving you and your routine. But now here you are in the entrepreneurial world, and it's the opposite. There's no playbook. You are your own commander. Mm-hmm. So can you talk to me a little bit about just the brief history and time of Ben and how you went to the military, what motivated that, and then let's talk about your transition out into the world we live in today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And thanks for having me on, Richard. I think this is a pretty cool show you got going here and a pretty good platform that you're doing. So to start off then on the military aspect. So I always, probably from the age of about, 12 or 14 years old, my grandfather served in the Air Force. And but other than my dad didn't, my uncles didn't. So it wasn't like I was around it as a kid that much. But it was something where I was always obsessed with, military history and just from the get-go. And so right around 12 or 14 years, I can't remember exactly, but that's kind of where I had it in my head I was going to join somehow. And so go through high school. I did pretty good in high school, was involved in sports, everything else, and got a ROTC scholarship for college, right? And so it's kind of how I got introduced, kind of going on the officer track on that. So got a full scholarship, went to school. And when I graduated and commissioned as a second lieutenant, and was given a 35 Delta, which is military intelligence officer, was my MOS branch. So did that, went off to Fort Huachuca where we did our training, and then from there went off to Germany for 2 years, and then back to South Carolina, Fort Jackson, where I spent the last 2 years before getting out of active duty, and then I spent another couple of years in the reserves. So all that to say, I had a blast. I enjoyed every single second of my service and made a lot of lifelong friends, and definitely would not be where I am today without going through that experience, especially constantly being put in situations where I'm just uncomfortable all the time, that either physically or just mentally. And by doing that, I think it kind of really primed me. And this is probably why a lot of veterans become good business owners later on, is one, at a fairly young age, you're given a lot of responsibility. Yeah, like as an officer, I'm given a lot of responsibility. I have a lot of people who directly report to me. I have to manage a budget. You're routinely, even as a young officer, you're signing away millions of dollars of equipment that you're kind of responsible for, and then hopefully nothing happens to it. And so when I got out, I gotten used to being responsible for a lot of things, and I liked that self-satisfaction I got from either completing the mission or whatever task was put in front of me and completing it. And so when I went to go work for a bank after that, I just really, after the first year, I was like, this is just not what I want to do. Like it was nice money. It was easy, but it was just, I couldn't see myself spending 20 years and not having that same sense of purpose in it. So going from that then into the world of acquisition made a huge amount of sense. Not only do I have ownership of the companies that I own, but I also have teams. I have people that I'm pouring into and a challenge every single day, right? Some are more passive than others, but for the most part, every single one of the acquisitions I've done or the people that I'm helping with inside of Acquisition Ace, my community is all about just overcoming that challenge of trading time for money, and how do we optimize for being able to do build legitimate wealth, but through a mechanism in which you're able to use highly leveraged financing and to be able to step out on the other end of that without working 100 hours a week to achieve that. So that's kind of what I've focused on and why I'm definitely enjoying what I'm doing now.
Great. Yeah, you were with was it JP Morgan?
Yeah.
And then moved on to Alliance Defending Freedom as you're involved with transformational partnerships, which I find interesting because that's precisely what you're helping people do these days. Then you're co-founder of the Fit Pro Tracker.
Yep.
Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah. So, well, with ADF, real quick, that's it was a Christian legal nonprofit that I started doing, and once I left banking, it was a great way because it wasn't necessarily a it wasn't like a 40, 60-hour a week job. There was travel involved and everything else, but it gave you enough time as well to focus on getting into acquisition. So it was a great kind of W-2 stability, great people, awesome mission, loved doing it, but also gave me some of that bandwidth. Fit Tracker was actually my first kind of acquisition I got into. So it was a startup in a sense where it was only about a year old when I came to it. Connected actually another Army veteran that we connected over LinkedIn, and we were talking, and it was just me reaching out for advice. Actually, I was looking at acquiring and getting into a fitness franchise, and he actually owned one of those fitness franchises. So I connected with him just to see his opinion on it. And that turned into, hey, he has a software company, and he's at a point where he really needs someone to kind of help with building the team out and kind of figuring out how to raise money. And of course, I've been doing that for years at that point. And I said, you know what? I can come on board out in exchange for doing these things, raising money, building out the team. I'll come in and be a part owner and acquire this much equity. And he agreed. And so I was able to kind of do almost a consulting for equity deal as my first deal. And that got me involved into Fit Pro Tracker. Still have that company to this day. It's much larger now. We have probably about 18 employees, I think, at that company. And that kind of got me, okay, that one worked out well. And I was able to kind of creatively structure that deal, let me jump and try to do that again. And so that's what kind of had me down that path of acquisitions.
Yeah, one of your mantras is to buy a business using $0 or zero of your own dollars.
Yep.
And it sounds like perhaps this was an impetus for that. You were able to leverage sweat equity in order to transact into the company.
Yeah, mostly. I still had to put a little bit of cash in. I think if I remember correctly, it was a few $1,000s. And it was mostly because it was basically the legal costs of restructuring the company in a way in which we can grow and raise money. Because there's ways in which you want to structure a company so that you can raise a lot of investor money. And so it was just a typical LLC at the point. We wanted to restructure into a corporation. A Delaware corporation and doing that. And so that cost a few grand in terms of getting all that stuff put together. And I said, you know what? Part of me coming in, I will take care of this and do that. So it was kind of mostly sweat equity with a very little cash up front for the equity.
Did you pursue venture capital for that one, or are you still in pursuit?
So there's been a couple of times we had conversations with venture capital. It's never worked out because the timing as well as the kind of goals for what we have for this company just didn't align necessarily. We were growing at a good organic clip. Me or my partner in it don't have a strong desire to 10x in 1 year. And because, again, I have other things going on, I'm not going to devote the time that it would take to do that. And plus, the support that you get normally for that is usually just a bunch of money, and it's crazy timelines, and you got to meet this because the investors need this type of metrics to be hit, and it comes with a lot of pressure. And so for us, we kind of more the organic friends and family route, raising money, raised a few million that way, to where we're able to do it much more on our timeline, much focus on the features that we think are important, not the VC that thinks it's important. And we're at a point right now where we're at a point where we are still raising, but it's at a point where our burn has now gotten to the point where we're pretty much revenue burn is neutral. So we're pretty much almost to a positive state on that. And we've grown 15x since then. And so we've done really well in terms of growth and where we want to take that. We've at this point, if I go from the value, we've probably 10x the value of the company since then. And so everything's going well. We're growing at the fast clip. So to answer your question, the VC route was just not the one that made sense at the time.
And it's such an important distinction for any aspiring entrepreneur. Someone might have a great idea, a great product, great service, and perhaps they want to step into a startup. And there are ways you do that. You can either bootstrap it yourself as the
Yep.
one person team, or partner up with someone, or you go seek the venture capital. But then there's also the other route, which is one that really interested me when I first started talking to you, and that's buying an existing business. Existing businesses, they've already burned down all of that startup
Correct. Yep.
that quote sweat equity, so to speak, is already baked into the model, and now you have a functioning platform. You're stepping in while this thing is already in flight, already making money, already has existing sales and marketing and branding and all of that stuff, has existing customers that you don't have to go out and pay that first high cost of customer acquisition, et cetera, and so forth. So with all of those costs already kind of burned into the model, that was definitely attractive to me and what we're trying to do with our family. I've been involved in a couple of startups myself, and I know for a fact the 100-hour work weeks,
Oh yeah.
literal blood, sweat, and tears that goes along with that. And I'm just a little too long in the tooth these days to go back through one of those. So I really like the model, and that's the model offered by your current venture, Acquisition Ace.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And to your, I think a good point that you just brought up, Richard, was when you acquire an existing company, like when we go back to the statistics, right? So 95% of companies fail in the first 5 years, right? Startups, right? Everyone wants to be the next Facebook or Uber, and it's just the odds are very stacked against you. When you're looking at acquisition, we're only looking at companies normally that are older than 5 years, and so you're already seeing like they're already that 5% that already made it right past that. So you're already getting the cream of the crop that you're trying to acquire, and so the rate of success of acquiring those companies is over 90% for the next 5 years, right? Because you've already gone through the gauntlet. They've survived the fiery furnace, and they've walked out, and they still are operating, still have cash flow, still living their dream, and you're able to acquire that. And they've done all that sweat equity, hard work, and now you're just building on top of it. So that is a good way of putting it.
And in today's market, we have the baby boomer generation who are in the process of retiring. What were the stats behind that again?
Yeah. So there's on the baby boomer generation, there's 75 million baby boomers. They represent about a third of all small businesses is that they own. And so that's about 13 million businesses that need to exchange hands in the next 10 years or so for all of those 75 million to kind of retire, because they're getting to that retirement age. So now, not all those are good businesses. Not all of those are businesses that you should buy, but it's the largest group of people we have in the US in terms of a generation. And that represents nearly $15 trillion worth of value. And so that value has to exchange hands. It either goes to their kids, it goes to you trying to buy it, or they shut it down, right? And it kind of evaporates, and some other competitor will scoop up those customers. So that's what we're going after. We're going after that share of wealth that needs to be transferred over this next 10 years.
Now, for someone who's looking to get into this M&A world, where do they even begin looking for these types of businesses? And once they find those types of businesses, what criteria do they need to consider in looking at these businesses?
Yeah. So when someone gets started, the easiest way to get started, really just to get your feet wet, is just go on like bizbuysell.com and just look at what people are selling, right? So it's free. You go on there and just put in your area. So if you live in, where I live in, let's say Naples, Florida, click on Naples, Florida, see what shows up and start going through it. Some of the businesses you might recognize and be like, oh, yep. And then you got it up right here. Perfect. And so you go on there and you can see what's for sale. You click on the listing. You can see the cash flow right there. You can see the price. You'll see what the broker's written about, what type of business it is, why they're selling, how many employees they have, everything that you need to know really to get kind of a high level idea about that business. So just practice, go there, look through those listings, come up with questions based on what you see in the listings, and then reach out to the broker and say, hey, is this, is the owner really retiring? Why are they retiring? or why are they selling if they're not retiring? Is this business, is it prime? Does it use any marketing to get its leads? So you're really kind of probing to see what is the state of the business, because you're not going to get all the answers from this ad, but you get enough of it to know whether or not it's in the right location, the right industry, and if it's doing somewhat the cash flow and the top line revenue numbers that you're looking for. And it's a great way to get started.
And it's what I found. Once you shake off kind of the being enamored at the process,
Yeah. Yeah.
once you kind of shake that off, it's really like looking for real estate. We've all
Correct.
been out there looking for a home or whatever. And so you just have to find the one with the right bones for you. And the process is basically you go to one of these portals, or you can go through a brokerage.
Yep.
Just like real estate has brokers, so do businesses. And many of them are both business and real estate brokers. But I would go into this form, I would send a message. A broker, in theory, gets this message of my interest, and then they're going to send me. Typically, they'll send me a confidential information memorandum, or what we call a SIM.
Yep.
So I do have a SIM I'd like to look at some point, but we can get there. I think first, it's important to talk about some of the basic criteria first. And you have a pretty catchy acronym on how to find these businesses. If you could go over that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the three things that I always tell people to look for is you want a business that is going to be recession resistant. That's going to be recurring revenue, and it has a barrier to entry. So, because a lot of people ask me getting into as a student or just connecting with me online, they'll be like, "What type of business should I buy?" And the answer is not simple, because every business is different, and there's industries where I like, but not every deal I would like. So what I always is put through the lens of, does it hit these three things? Is it recession resistant, meaning if a recession happens, or someone loses their job, or they cut their monthly income in half, would they still have to buy this service? If the answer is yes, okay, good. Now go to the next thing. Is it recurring revenue? Meaning once you get the customer on, are they going to come back and buy again with a high likelihood? And either it's going to be subscription based, which is great, or they become your customer and now you get to charge them for maintenance or whatever, right? Like think about landscaping or pool cleaning. And so great if it hits that. And the last one is it has a barrier to entry. So this is something where it's kind of hard for someone to start tomorrow and compete against you on price. If the answer is yeah, it would take a lot of investment. It would take a lot of time. Good. That's enough of a barrier to where someone's not going to just willy-nilly jump in and try to take your customers. They would have to spend a lot of time and energy to do that. And so that's good. We want to make that barrier. So those are kind of the three things I tell everyone to look at when they're starting to get into the acquisition process.
Right. And there's the old saying, buy a boring business.
Yep.
And where I started was looking at car washes, laundromats, those kinds of businesses, which are great. Specifically, I was looking for something that has low labor resource requirements. Very good. What I found, though, is I'm a little bit late to the curve, because this community kind of figured that out about 10 years ago. And now there are entire podcast series around doing laundromats specifically and car washes. But it's interesting how innovation has caught up to those spaces. Like car washes, for example. They used to be a cinder block square that you drive in and you spray it down yourself. You put some quarters in a machine and maybe use the vacuum and get the kids' cookie crumbs out of the back seat, and you're on your way. But with the demand of the market, you've seen that level of competition really increase in a space like that. And so automation has been huge. And I think that's one of the tenets you push for as well, is the when you're looking at a business, you want to look for that fax machine. And can you explain what you mean by the fax machine model?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you want to look for businesses where the amount of effort that you have to put into it is minimal compared to the return you're going to get, right? So when you're looking at a business and you go in and they're making good cash flow, they've been around for 40 years, and you walk in the office and you see that they're using a fax machine, right, to send invoices or whatever with their customers, you're like, wow, there's very simple effort that guy can put into this to make this way easier for both the business and the customer. So that's value that I can add with there's a million softwares out there that can help with that. And I can get rid of the fax machine. And just by doing that alone, I'm going to increase efficiency. So then you look at other parts of the business. They're using pen and paper still for everything. They have filing cabinets. They're filing their stuff away. Okay, so let's bring that online. Let's bring it to a cloud. Let's do a lot of things that we think as just normal day-to-day activities now, where a lot of these businesses have been operating away, which worked for years, and they're still making money and they're still doing well. And they're still being very, a great cash flowing business by doing these things. So just by going and slowly changing some of these old types of strategies, you're able to bring really good ROI to the business with very minimal time effort on your part. So that's what we're always looking for when we're looking at different types of businesses to buy.
Yeah. So you want it to be boring. You want it to be as low risk as possible. You want the sale to be achievable.
Correct. Yep.
Non-volatile business. So it's steady and it's at minimum resistant through the recession. And it's differentiated, AKA the bland model.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yep.
So once I find a business, the question then for that aspiring entrepreneur is, yeah, it sounds great. Now, how the heck do I afford to get into this thing? I hear what you're saying, no money down, use other people's money, but what's the reality there? And what I found is the reality is you're spot on when you say the word creative. There are so many different avenues to actually acquire these business, whether it's incorporating a seller's note, whether it's rolling over 401k or retirement funds. And there's a specific program that we did. It's called the ROBS program.
Yep.
And there are some catches, there's some pitfalls to some of these. And I'm by no means a financial advisor, nor am I providing financial advice right here. You have to refer to your CPA and legal team and all of that good stuff. But these mechanisms are out there. And one of the more revealing things to me this year has been how interest rates have really forced the hand of those creative mechanisms. Because I've seen quotes for 10.5%, 11% over 10 years on $1 million, $2 million, $3 million acquisition. And the reality, if you're getting financing through a traditional bank, or even if it's an SBA guided bank, the debt service on these loans is extremely expensive. Just kind of, I don't know, just for round numbers sake, I saw a $2 million business. If I put 10% down on that, then I'd be financing 90% at 10.5% per year over 10 years. The monthly payment on that was going to be $25,000.
Yep.
And now when we look at cash flows, that business may only have $25,000 in cash flow every month.
Correct.
And so now I'm going to go in and just break even and not pull a single penny to my own household from doing this transaction.
Correct.
So what have you seen out there? Have you seen any of these kinds of pitfalls with some of your clients? And what sort of other creative avenues have you discovered out there?
Yeah. So one of the most important things when doing a deal is, especially if you're financing it, is you want to lock the seller into making sure they're sticking around to help you out, right? So, because at the end of the day, this business is new to you, and this person has been around potentially for 20 years, building this thing from the ground up. They know everything about it. And you want to make sure that you're keeping that person on for as long as you possibly can to help out and be incentivized to do so. So a lot of times, even when it's finance, we structure seller financing into the deal. So the seller becomes part of the bank. And so on $1 million purchase, if you get a 10% seller note, that means $100,000 you have to pay back to the seller. So you don't have to do it at closing. It's going to be paid over time to the seller. And so that $100,000, and you agree with the seller on what those terms are. It could be no interest, it could be 5%, whatever. And you kind of come up with that structure. But what it does is it keeps that seller interested in the success of the business because they want to get paid back, right? And so it's a whole different level of buy-in when they want to get that 100K, and they know that they don't want you to fail, so therefore they'll answer your call. Therefore, they're going to put some effort into making sure you're going to be good. So one part of the creative financing is going to be on the seller side. The other part of other creative strategies is kind of going back to what I did before with kind of the sweat equity. So there's all different means like you can do where you're trading, sweat for equity. You're doing seller financing. You're doing bank financing. You're doing investor. You're raising money from investors, and then you can mix all the things I just mentioned all in the same deal, right? So there's a lot of ways you can get deals done, and we actually have someone who's in the community this coming Friday. We're having Josh Wilson talk about his recent acquisition and how he kind of structured that, which is a little bit different than other people. So that'll be interesting to get into. But yeah, so to your question, yes, in today's interest rate environment where the SBA rates are 10, 11%, and you're doing that over a 10-year term, your payments are heavy. Now, there's still deals out there that cash flow really nice, even with the heavy payments. But on that example you gave, that's, you're talking almost $300,000 a year you're paying in that. Like it's a lot. It's a lot that you're going to be giving towards debt service, and that's for the next 10 years, right? So totally makes you want to do things in a way where you're mitigating risk, which means getting creative is essential.
Yeah. What do you see in 2024 regarding the lending rates? Do you think we're at a peak? Do you see them going down, particularly given it's an election year? What does that horizon look like?
Yeah, great question. I do think that in the short term, between now and the end of the year, there's probably a good likelihood to come May, June, there's going to be some cuts. I don't think they're going to be drastic cuts. I think that there'll be, a couple basis points drop, and they'll do maybe a few consistent cuts because they always like going into election year where that's the case, right? Like, so anytime rates drop, people invest, real estate will get a pop, stocks will get a pop. And usually the incumbency likes to see that happen in an election year. So I think that's going to happen, but I'm not going to bet on that happening. I'm not going to underwrite a deal or do a deal that relies upon that happening, right? I'm always going to be super conservative in the way that I approach a way a deal is being structured. And so regardless if that happens, the deals I do will be okay. And that's how everyone should do it.
Well, and that fluidity of those rates is really to be considered in any of these kinds on a seller note, because seller notes may sometimes accompany that balloon payment after 2 or 3 years, right?
Yeah.
Because what's like with a seller note, what's the standard kind of payback approach to that seller? Like starting versus future?
Yeah, you know what? There's really not a necessarily a template. Everyone's different. Every one of my deals has been different. But I would say that normally sellers are the sooner the better for most sellers. Obviously, they want to get their money back. So minimum 3 years. Maximum I've seen really is actually I've seen up to 20 years. But for the most part, typically between 3 and 10 years is where the seller is going to be getting paid back. The older the seller is, the more likely they want the shorter one, right? They're not going to be around potentially for another 10, 20 years. And so they want to get the money back. And so that is that is the case. So I would say be aware of whatever amount that you're doing. Minimum is probably going to be 3, max 10. And I've seen no interest added. I've seen all the way up to usually half. The highest I see is usually half of what the SBA is doing. That's usually the high.
Right. Now the SBA, one misconception out there is that the SBA lends money, and that's really not the case. Small Business Administration is not a lender, but Correct. They provide guidance to lenders, and they provide up to 75% backing on a loan if the buyer goes into default.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're basically for people, especially people that are veterans. Think about it like the VA loan on a home loan. Like the VA is not giving you the mortgage, a bank is, but the VA is giving insurance to the bank that if something happens, the bank's going to be made mostly whole to that. So that's same thing with the SBA.
Yeah. I had a really unfortunate one fall through recently. It was like the elite pinnacle of boring businesses.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It was a chemical distributor for car washes for the car wash industry.
Oh wow. Yep.
What's the saying? If there's, I forget what that saying is, but if there's a gold rush, sell the picks and axes.
Yeah.
Exactly. But this business had been around for going on 30 years, and it was really sad that I couldn't help get this deal pushed through. The husband, it was a husband-wife team, a couple of owners, and the husband unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago during the COVID thing, and the wife was left now running the business. And while she was familiar with it, she had not been running the daily operations. And so now you start to see sales decrease because obviously there's a different level of engagement from that business owner. And so sales were declining, and you can just tell that her involvement in the business was not a hindrance. She was doing really well to keep the doors open, but all of the good metrics were declining for the past 3 years. Whereas it had fed their family for 30 years, now they're just in this unfortunate kind of transition, right? And so now she had taken one of these idle loans during COVID. And what happens with those idle loans is if you ever sell the business, that loan gets called. You have to pay it off. There's no transfer of that loan. And so she had dropped the price of and she's about to turn 80 years old.
Wow. Yeah.
You can understand she's tired and just wants to get out from under this thing. And it was very unfortunate that the means that I had to look at how to finance this was through the traditional SBA kind of backed mechanism. And the sales price was just a bit too high for what I had liquid. But the price itself for the business was a bargain. However, the bank is going to only look at the past 3 years of business financials. And when they see that downhill trend of declining sales, increasing costs of goods, it just becomes a recipe for disaster. So if anyone out there is looking for a sweet deal, then hit me up, because I think it's still open. It's not dead, but it was dead from what I could offer for it.
Oh man, that's rough. I know there's situations like that where you wish with every fiber of your being that it can work out, right? Because you're not only going to benefit yourself with acquiring a good business, but also help out someone who really needs to get rid of it, right? So that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Have you heard of any either really, really bad stories of through your network, or really, really good success stories? I'd love to hear kind of the polarized edges of this thing, because it's not all rainbows and unicorns.
No, it definitely is not. And so on the bad side, let's see, recently, have I heard anybody who had a bad side? Okay, so one person that's in my network acquired a manufacturing business, and good business, very niche, very long-standing, great. But when you do an asset sale, you start day one with zero on the account, right? And this person didn't have enough working capital, and they didn't calculate the correct amount of working capital needed in order for to start getting the cash flow coming in from the business. And when you have something that's a manufacturing business, the payment terms, the cash flow cycle is usually long, right? So you are creating the product, selling the product. Sometimes those payments are net 30, net 45, net 60, depending on the industry. And so you might go a whole quarter without getting paid on the product until it comes back in. So if you're not properly calculating what that could look like, you could buy the business, zeros in the account, payroll comes up, got no cash, right? And then maybe something hits the account, and then that gets taken right out because you have to go and for overhead. And then you're still waiting for a couple of big projects to pay you. And it might not be another 30, 45 days before those projects pay you. Now you're looking for a short-term loan to pay your people, and it can get into a real quick death spiral. And so managing cash flow and working capital is probably the biggest thing I see where it gets people in trouble. Like they just don't calculate enough, always err on the side of more. Like it's always great to have way more working capital than you need and not less. And so that situation got him the person got in a crunch for like a good few months, and they were calling every single broker out there to try to get a loan to give them a bridge loan. And now they're in a good spot, but it was 6 months of hell to get through that to actually start getting the income coming in from the business. So that's one warning. On the good side, I would say that we have a couple actually within the group too. One of them recently that was a really good deal that went down is Zach Jensen in the group. He bought an accounting firm. He lives in LA, bought an accounting firm in DC area, Northern Virginia. He's on track this year with and the cool thing about accounting firms is he knows pretty much every month what they're making because they do bookkeeping, they do taxes. So it's very easy to project what you're going to be making by the end of the year. And he's on track probably to do over $1 million in EBITDA on the business. And Zach is a smart guy. He's really focusing on systems and processes. The owner stayed on after the transaction and maintained equity. So obviously he's kind of running as the GM, the owner. And so Zach doesn't have to really be involved in the day-to-day. He's kind of just focusing on more on how do I make this business better and more efficient and to scale it. So great opposite. Like he's definitely putting some good amount of work into it the first 3 months, but his goal is to kind of step back out after that. But yeah, it's doing a great transition period, and it's going to crush in his first year. So I would say is a good example.
That is great. The sim I have is actually a construction company, and construction has that similar risk to manufacturing. We have the very long collection cycle. And one of the, I don't want to say sneaky things, but one of the tricks you have to understand going into construction acquisition is how invoicing and how invoicing occurs, how the labor cycle against that invoicing occurs. And so you really have to look at some very specific bookkeeping stuff like estimate complete on the projects, because they may have already overspent and overbilled. And while the contract that is transferring says $1 million at the top, there may be $0 left to even invoice or whatnot.
Correct. Yep.
So let me show you this. And this is not one I'm active on. It's one I looked at a while back, and I've sanitized all of the branding out of there because obviously once you look at these things, you go under NDA.
Yep.
So can you see this?
Yep. I can see it.
Okay. So we'll just call this a Texas construction company.
Yep.
Now we're just pretend I'm new at this. Where would you lead me on this sim review?
Yeah. So first thing we're going to go is look at the financial summary and go down to what has it been doing in top line. And so yeah, go right down to the financial summary, and we're going to look at shows right here, just last year, this is 2 years ago at this point. And it should maybe go through, probably show you a couple of years here. So not just 2022, but it potentially could show you, I'm guessing, the last 3 years on this one.
Yeah, on this one, we've got 22, 21, and 20.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, you're looking at this, you're looking at, just like you talked about, you want the revenue to tell a story. So we want to see the story going like this in a upward trajectory, not a downward trajectory. And so looking at the last few years, 2022, it did 2.1, almost 2.2. 2021 was 1.6. And then 2020 looks like 900. So it's definitely growing, right? It's going in a good trajectory. And then we'll go down to see what the SDE, or the seller discretionary earnings, looks like. And that is, let's see. All right, net income. Do they have an SDE? Okay, so they're basically saying it's 983,000 the past year. So on that, 2022 is 983. 21 is going to be Let's see, go down to from 983 to 370, 380. And then, so big jump. And then 2020, we're looking at probably, I'm guessing 150, 200, let's see. 170. Yep. So
Yep.
170 to ish 350, and then all the way jumps up to 980, right? 380, then to 980. So that is obviously a hockey stick, pretty much in growth as well. So once I see that, if the narrative is that they're growing, great, sounds good. Next thing we're going to look at is management. What is the owner currently doing? How many hours a week are they working? What are the tasks that they are doing? Is it something that I can easily replace? If not, I'm pretty much out at that point, right? Even if the finances look good, if it's not an easy transition for me, then I'm going to move on to find one that is.
Yeah. In this case, we'll say the owner is involved, but not integral, not a critical factor to the business. There could be some owner transition period with a handoff of existing business relationships, but they have a sales team, they have a project management team, and it could float on its own for a few months if it had to.
Gotcha. Okay, so the owner, then I would say, is there's still probably a few tasks that need to be outsourced from the current owner to make it to where you are not running, you don't have to be going into the office or doing any essential tasks.
Right. Yeah. And now one distinction on this type of business is that they are the only construction company in this region who is a preferred government contractor for VA home building.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So very distinct competitive advantage when you look at it from that perspective.
Barrier to entry, it hits that on the barrier to entry there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the rise in growth that you see, that hockey stick, was due to that award of that government business.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And one of the other key things for everyone who's listening, when there's big jumps in revenue, jumps in SDE, or losses and declines, you always have to figure out the story behind it, because the first thing the bank is going to do is saying, well, what happened? And if you just say, oh, they just got more customers, like, that's not a good answer. A good answer would be they got this new designation as a VA builder that's hard to get, and only a few get it, and the only one in the county or wherever they are that has it, which created an influx of jobs for them. That's a story that is understood, right? That makes sense. So that you just make sure you're always understanding what is happening and how you can tell that story to the bank.
So on this one, I should have picked one that had an actual SDE represented, because that's the magic acronym, seller discretionary earnings. My traditional educational foundation says, look at the bottom line, look at the net income.
Yeah.
But can you explain a bit on SDE, and then of course on EBITDA, and how they relate to net?
Yep. Very true. Very good question. So the difference between net income and SDE is that SDE is always going to be higher than net income, and SDE is always going to be higher than EBITDA. The reason why EBITDA is earning before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, it's basically an accounting term for it's more closely aligned with net income than SDE is, right? So typically when we're looking at businesses in acquisition, anything under $1 million in cash flow, they're going to utilize SDE. Anything over $1 million, they're going to utilize EBITDA as a term, right? For multiples. So that's just an easy way of understanding when you're going to see it. Now, for most people that are my students, everything else, we're looking at deals where the SDE or a cash flow is under $1 million. And so they're going to use the term SDE, which is seller discretionary earnings. And that includes net income plus something called add backs, right? And so when you have SDE, that is, not only is that telling you the seller what he made on salary, but also what the seller made on distributions. And then what was the seller using the business for as his personal piggy bank for his personal expenses? That could be cell phone, paying the car lease, private trips, going out to eat, all of those things, right? And so what they do is the seller says, hey, I used the business for like $50,000 of my own personal expenses last year, but that had nothing to do with the business. It gave no benefit to the business. That was just expenses that were my personal ones. So I'm going to add that $50K back in and add it to the SDE, because if you were running it, you wouldn't have done those things. And so therefore that's seen as profit. And so that's the argument for these add backs, and that's included in SDE. Now, when you're looking at deals, you want as few add backs as possible, because the bank is going to be very wary on accepting just random add backs, right? If it's like, hey, I spent $10,000 last year in going out to eat, bank's probably not going to recognize that as an add back, because the bank's like, look, if you own this business, you're probably going to go out and eat and spend it on the business expenses as well. So you're looking for things that are very outside the realm of, cannot be associated with business whatsoever, to get the bank to understand that, and then for them to add that add back number back into the SDE. Because at the end of the day, the SDE is super important, because that's the multiple is the price of the business is based on that SDE. So the seller and the broker are trying to inflate that SDE number as high as they can, because that means a higher price. And so that's why the add backs really become a point of contention, because the seller and broker want to add it because it makes a higher SDE. And you as the buyer want to be really scrutinize it, because you don't want anything to count that shouldn't count, because you won't have to pay for it on the multiple. And so that's why that's so important.
Right. Can you see my screen right now?
I can. Yep.
Yeah. So just starting at the top, we've got our income, our sales income, and this is month over month. So this is just a single year, or excuse me, no, this one is actually year over year. To the right, it's monthly, but you got your sales less your cost of goods, that's your gross profit. Then less all your operating expenses.
Yep.
Where we traditionally look is line 40 here. That's your net income. That's the bottom line. But below there, this is the representation of add backs. So you have net, but now you've got all of these other types of categories. In this case, for this business, owner's compensation is added back. Any taxes that owner paid, travel, automobile, entertainment, any kind of training. And so these are the types of things that are considered also the bonus of owning the business. So if I'm that owner, I get the net, but I'm also getting, say, whatever travel, whatever entertainment, et cetera, and so forth. At least that's the case that the broker is going to try to make, because that's going to, not artificially, but it's going to potentially inflate that discretionary earnings, or EBITDA. And then what you're talking about there with the multiplier is, once we have that SDE or EBITDA, let's say here on this year, 153,000 is the cash flow. You might have a 3x multiplier. So 3 times whatever that number is, $460,000.
Yeah.
That's going to be roughly in the ballpark of negotiation for what this business is going to sell for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so then that's why it all becomes down to, there's a lot of arguments that have been had and negotiations around what counts as an add back or not, because if you're going at a 3 or 4 multiple, you're timesing that number by 3 or 4, it can add a significant amount to the overall purchase price, right, that you're trying to purchase a business for. So, yep, definitely important. And that's usually a point of contention in most deals.
Well, I had a talk recently with a broker, and it was a decent business, but it's a small business, and it had property tied to it, which property is always kind of it's a double-edged sword, getting that real estate mixed into the deal, because it's great collateral for the bank, but it also throws off your debt service.
Yep.
But the broker was saying, well, we only play in the 4 to 5 multiplier because we're mid-market. And I said, this business is only mid-market because you're applying a 4 to 5 multiplier.
Yeah.
This is not a mid-market business. And so, yeah, those are some fun conversations to have.
Yeah, that is some of my favorite conversations ever, and I'm being very sarcastic, have been with brokers on how how they value the businesses they're selling, why this business is so good. Yeah, and again, I know they have a job to do. I know they're trying to make money and a living. I don't fault them for that, but you'll definitely have conversations, especially people in our community after they've been in there for a while and learned all these things. It's you find yourself basically in a better position of understanding I think I know more than a broker does on this deal in terms of how to get this deal done. And that's always an interesting spot to find yourself in.
Yeah, there have been some where I really surprised myself. I've only been doing this 3 or 4 months,
Yeah.
and I've not even closed a deal yet, but it was abundantly clear that I was more well versed than the broker.
Yeah.
I say that, but then I'll say this as well. Some of the brokers I've encountered have been the most awesome,
Yeah.
amazing human beings that I have met
Yeah.
in
Yep.
this world. I mean, super upfront. Um, I like the ones who are just straight up honest right out of the chute. Like, hey, you're not going to cash flow this. Just telling me what you're telling me, you're not going to
Yeah.
cash flow this. Another one was, let's talk about the medical device distribution company, and
Yeah.
let's get it from a perspective of, do you know what you're doing?
Yeah.
And he really dove into the nuances of whatever this company was. Oh, it was a pharmacy. He was
Yeah.
like, so you want to get into the pharmacy game, huh? And I said, well, the numbers look good. He said, yeah, the numbers look good, but do you know how to sell into the medical space? And do you know how to compete with
Yeah.
the good RX and all of these? And do you know the game between generics and name brand? And do you know those things? And by the end of our 7-minute conversation, he had convinced me utterly that I'm never going to even attempt to buy a pharmacy.
Yeah. So he saved you a lot of time and trouble going down that path for doing that. Yeah. And that is a good broker in that one. That's because he's doing it against his best interest, right? Like selling the business would be where he gets paid. And so him telling you, hey, look, probably not the best for you it's showing a good human being doing that.
So now my sarcasm kicks in. And now I think about the franchise brokers.
Yep.
And yes, they get a bad rap, but I think from my perspective, that's for a very good reason. What is the deal with franchise brokers? And I know you have a namesake, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I will go ahead and say that I am not impressed by the the approach, we'll say, of the franchise brokers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm totally with you. So franchise brokers, it's hard because they are even more so than normal brokers. They are trying to pigeonhole you into um, whatever offering that they have the rights to basically sell, like they've made agreements with. So they're very, very biased, obviously. They're going to try to fit a square peg in a round hole all day long. And so I don't go down that route. I don't talk to them just because I'm not against franchises to acquire, but I already kind of know up front, like which ones I'm kind of interested in based on reputation, based on business models. And so I try to steer clear of anyone whose best interest is just selling no matter what the background is of the applicant or how good this really franchise is and how they're 10% of the everything you make is going back to the franchisor, and is that worth 10%? A lot of them are not. What they do for you is not worth 10%. And so yeah, I'm with you in that those are not conversations I like to have.
Yeah. Yeah. We almost moved on a franchise several years ago, but the difference was our friends owned the FDD, so to speak. They were the
Yeah.
founder of this franchise chain, and we didn't have to deal with a franchise broker. And it was actually a very good company, but just the world didn't work out at that time for us. So, but yeah, I think there are some good ones out there. It depends kind of on back to what kind of entrepreneur, business owner you really want to be, I think.
Yeah.
The franchise model, I think it works for some personalities because it's framed up for you.
Correct.
The sales, the marketing, all of this stuff is kind of supported in the background, at least at a national level. And you have a script. You've got your playbook, your SOP. You've got a training course that typically they're going to put you through so that everything is is synced up with all of the other franchises. And so it works for some people.
Yeah.
But there's that trade-off of it's a very finite box that you have to play in. There's very little room for creative growth in exploring new services and products outside of what they offer. I guess for good reason. If you've ever seen whatever that movie was about the McDonald's, the origins of the
Oh
McDonald's.
yeah. Yep. Yeah. With Michael Keaton
Yeah.
is the guy. But yep. Great movie. I love that movie. It's good.
Yeah.
Good movie. Yep. The founder. Yeah.
And that's the reason McDonald's is so huge. I mean, they made sure that everything was a cookie cutter and that you did not fall outside those parameters. But that's not my that's not my gig. I'm looking for the model that I can expand upon and perform that innovation and kind of the fax machine journey.
Yeah.
Can I automate this? What other creative and clever partnerships can we come up with, and so forth? But just things to consider in everyone's quest.
Yeah.
So, Ben, let's talk very specifically about Acquisition Ace, how people can find you, what's the value proposition there. I won't proselytize, even though I am part of the community and I do find value in it, but I don't want this to turn into like some kind of, infotainment commercial or whatever. But I would like you to talk about Acquisition Ace because I do believe in it.
Good. No, I appreciate that, Richard. So yeah, Acquisition Ace is a community of like-minded entrepreneurs who are going out there trying to get their first acquisition done. And part of the process that we offer is kind of helping on three aspects of sourcing deals, the aspects of funding deals, and then also kind of a community and mentorship. So everyone inside the community, we have 2 weekly calls, Mondays and Fridays, that are live. I'm jumping on, we're teaching. People get to ask questions. People get to connect with one another. We've had people who partner together inside the community to get deals done. We have people that are just going off and looking at deals and helping each other out with their backgrounds and experiences. And it's kind of really cool. People are doing meetups all around the country, which is awesome because that's nothing to do with me. That's just them doing their own thing and providing value to each other. So it's an awesome community. And it's been wild to see it grow over the last 8-9 months that it's been around. And I think at this point, we've done a couple dozen closes in that time period, and more people are getting things under contract by the week. And it's just a lot of fun. And people like you, Richard, people like Zach, who I mentioned earlier, just people that are willing to put the effort and the time in to do something that's extraordinary, which is acquiring a business is less than the 1% of the 1% doing. And it's something that's an amazing skill to generate wealth.
One thing that I've personally drawn from there are some pretty good relationships from the network. One of the people, Dominic Martinez, who is also on a very similar journey. We're not even in the same state. I don't know what he looks like, but we've been on a phone call every week talking about what kind of deals we found. And
that's awesome.
So I think there's a sense of camaraderie that can come out of there. And we have, yes, he and I have cursed. We've dropped our F-bombs together because of some of the walls. But it's been good. It's been healthy, and so anyone on this journey, either in Acquisition Ace or elsewhere, I encourage you to reach out to me. I can be a great sounding board if you need someone to look over a SIM. I'm happy to do so, but I would more so encourage you to reach out to Ben and his team and get involved that way, because there's a lot to be said about the community approach, because I'll be honest, it can be very scary and isolating.
Yes.
And it can be very mysterious. And without having, like you said, like-minded people on that same journey to talk about some of the ups and downs with, you might just intimidate yourself to not pursue that dream that you actually want. So
yeah, well said, Richard. I couldn't have said it better. And I think your example with Dominic and everything else like that, this is if you try to go on this journey by yourself, it's just one, it most likely will not end up in an acquisition, and two, you're going to be super frustrated and feel like you wasted a bunch of time. And so by airing your frustrations and your successes with the community around you, asking questions, having people, like we have people in the community that are from all walks of life. And so when you might be interested in buying a med spa, and then guess what? We might have someone in the community that works at a med spa, and they'd be like, hey, just let you know, you be careful about this, and this, because that's what happens. And so that's happened dozens of times already, where someone can give inside baseball knowledge on a deal. And it's been great. So this was awesome talking and kind of going through all this. And I appreciate you inviting me on to your show. And it's awesome. And I think that what you're doing, what I'm doing in the next 5 or 10 years, this is going to be something that's going to become more and more mainstream, to where people will be like, man, how did I not hear about this? And that's kind of, I think, where we are in that phase right now.
Yeah. And to get there, consistency is key.
Okay. Excellent. Yep.
Yeah. Ben, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Look forward to chatting, and I'll see you on the Friday call. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Richard. Appreciate your time today. Great chat.
Likewise.
All right. Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by Crash Test Designs, a company dedicated to teaching teams and organizations to embrace change through the application of human-centered design principles and agile project management frameworks. Crash Test Designs are registered Scrum trainers that offer world-class agile project management training designed to create practicing Scrum masters and product owners. Through their instruction, students are prepared to lead Scrum teams immediately. Use the coupon code BLUESKY at checkout for 10% off your next training. For course dates and information on additional offerings, visit www.crashtestdesigns.com. This episode of Blue Sky is sponsored by The Vanguard, the definitive online community for defense and aerospace leaders and innovators to grow, communicate, and build capacity in our defense industrial base. With curated discussion forums, exclusive networking, a desktop and mobile app, and unique access to working sessions and AMAs with top leaders in the defense and aerospace industries, The Vanguard is the next generation career accelerator for those looking to break into or make an impact on the defense and aerospace sectors. Join the ranks of The Vanguard today with a free trial and enter coupon code Blue Sky, that's one word, Blue Sky, at the link in this posting. This episode of Blue Sky is sponsored by Parabolic. Parabolic is dedicated to growing wealth together through business and organizational development services designed by conducting a rigorous workshop with your business leaders. Are you a small to medium-sized business needing to grow into new markets? Or have you grown too rapidly and now need to unwind some of the damage? There is no cookie-cutter template to solve your unique issues. There is no step-by-step proprietary method these other consultants claim for high fees. Parabolic focuses specifically on your unique challenges in a one-on-one setting to dive deeply into the issues, to develop a list of action items and next steps. And if we can help with those steps, we'll talk about it. No strings, no BS. Visit parabolic-strategy.com today to contact us. PARABOLIC-strategy.com. Let's go vertical.